Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Nathalie Ducommun. I'm a Deputy Chief Editor at the RTS. That's the French-speaking Swiss TV, radio, and multimedia. I'll ask my panelists to join me on stage. We have Susanne Wille from the SRF, which is the German-speaking... yes? Go on. The man in the middle, minorities in the middle today. Gavin Allen from the BBC, head of news output. We have Petra Stuiber with us, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Der Standard from Austria. And we have Caroline Bannock, editor from the community, The Guardian, at The Guardian in the UK. A reality check, connecting with audiences. What a theme. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to moderate this panel, not only because there's a majority of women here, not only because we've got some of the best professionals in Europe surrounding me, but also because it's, of course, a massive theme, and it's been discussed currently, debated, probably in all the newsrooms across the world. How do we reach our audiences? How do we listen? How do we engage with them? How do we sometimes involve the audiences in our journalistic practice? Today, we debate a lot about these questions. There's been, of course, a massive change with the rise of social media, enforcing us to change our practices, to create new formats, new contents. There was a need for innovation to well, learn about these new communities. Audience was becoming huge, international. That was a main challenge. Sorry. There's a specific, probably political context, polarized world. The question of trust has become central to the media. We're being accused of fake news. We've been accused of being bad people by the President of the United States recently in Austria. We had a vice-chancellor calling journalists prostitutes, I think. That's you know, really serious matters, and it questions us about, of course, how do we restore, how do we gain trust from our audiences in such a political context. And just to and that's this too long already introduction, mentioning the fact that it's such an exciting question, questioning ourselves about our audiences, because probably it's a philosophical question too. It says a lot about who we are, what our purpose is as a media, what are our goals, what is our mission. We're questioning ourselves really when we question our audiences and our relationship to our audiences. Okay, I said enough. Let's get into the debate. Probably with you, Caroline, you're in touch with the community specifically. You're from the press, The Guardian. Just to start off, how come, would you say, why is it so important today, probably more than years ago, to invest in the relationship with our audience? Has something changed?
Is it on? Yeah, everyone can hear. I think at The Guardian we've kind of looked at working with audiences or participatory journalism or reaching out to our readers for quite a long time, actually, certainly before I arrived at The Guardian 8 years ago. I mean, it's been one of the kind of key principles of The Guardian. But I think, your question is why it's become more important is because I think that, Guardian readers might understand our mission and what we're about, but I'm not sure that that translates to people everywhere. And I think what is really important now is to try and reach out beyond readers to people, to help them and to get them to understand what our independent journalism is all about. So for me, it is about actually moving in that direction beyond readers to people.
Thank you, Caroline. Petra, we were mentioning also that this political context, and you're in a country that's facing that. It's a massive challenge, of course, for you. Do you feel that restoring the trust of the audience has become more urgent today than it has been in the past?
Definitely, I do feel that, because if we don't do it, if we don't, we are not engaging more in our audience, then we will lose them, because we always thought that we have some common ground with our readers, but I think that's not true, because there are some issues where we are threatened to lose them on points of migration or something. Everyone can express his or her opinion via social media, and there is so much information, also fake news going around, and we have to declare how we make the difference. Independent journalism is the difference. So we have to communicate with our readers, with our posters, our users, to find out what are they interested in? What are the points where they? I mean, the Standard in Austria, it's a quality paper, it's a liberal paper, and we always thought that. On terms of migration politics, we and our readers, we have the same opinion, but that's not true at all. So we have to explain to them if they are interested. Why many of our liberal readers said, okay, we have to be more strict on asylum terms or something like that. So we declared what happens, what does it make with the asylum seekers if they are not allowed to work. So, and we wouldn't have found out if we didn't have made some better involvement with them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gavin Allen, does that mean that we took for granted, really, that the audience was just there and that we could just continue doing our job without really bothering about it? Are we guilty of something?
I don't think we ever took them for granted, but it is sort of amazing that we're having to ask the question, why is it important to engage with our audiences? No other business would wonder why we need to listen to our customers or understand what our customers want. And the fact that we're here thinking this is quite a big issue, we must engage with our audiences, if that's a novel approach, is pretty horrifying. And it is, I mean, look, we all know that there's so many things, so many ways for people to get their news, so it is more competitive. But I do think it's just fundamentally about improving our journalism. If we can engage and above all listen to, because there's a danger we treat the audience as somehow other, that we get our stuff to them as if they're over there and we're over here, rather than we all want to have the very best journalism to understand the world that we all live in. If we can understand what is relevant, engaging, and above all useful for our audience, that is useful for all of us. It improves our journalism. We are better organisations as a result. But I do think there was a BBC internal video that I was looking just before I came to this, and in that there were two things. One was the initiative that we've got, which is Meet the Audiences, which was about 4 years old, which again is sort of staggering that here's a novel approach. We're going to meet the audience, as if this is only a sort of something somebody struck us. Yeah. But also somebody said in the video, it was great to meet the audience because it's so easy in the daily grind to forget about the audiences. And you think, in that case, our daily grind is not the right daily grind. If we're able to forget about audiences, which is exactly what we're all about and all for, then our grind needs to shift, and that's what we're doing.
We'll go back to how it can improve our quality, reaching out with the audience and listening to the audience. But just on the diagnosis, Susanne, Wille, you and I, because you're my colleague in Switzerland, have been through the No Belag initiative. And I'm mentioning that it was a referendum and where people in Switzerland were asked to vote for financing the public service. Has that been definitely like a big challenge in Switzerland, made us realise that that the audience wasn't granted, and that we had to be more in touch with our audience and understand our audience better? The fact that we had to vote on the issue.
Absolutely. Is this working? Absolutely. I am not so sure whether if I agree on every point. I do think that we have taken the audience and the public for granted a little bit in the past. And in Switzerland, if there's a referendum going on which attacks the very existence of public media, it makes you think. And it was more than a wake-up call, I believe. We started to reinvent ourselves I'm not saying we didn't connect with the audience before that. Of course, it was always important, but we had to question ourselves what happened that some people in Switzerland do no longer believe that our existence is needed. What has happened that people somehow believe that we only pay for what we actually consume? Why didn't we explain well enough why we are important for a democratic society? So we had many discussions, and connecting with the audience means defining that connection. And I think there we have so much more that we can do. It's not just about thinking what the audience want, it's engaging with the audience. It's, going through social media. And above all, I do believe that social media has become a big game changer. And for example, as a public media company that has the legal obligation to help people build opinions, we have to be where these opinions are being built, and that is in social media. So what I'm saying is that that referendum for us was the starting point of a much closer relationship with our audience. Maybe I'll elaborate on that a little later.
Thank you, Susanne. Is this working or not? Yes? Okay. I think, well, it's okay. I think, interesting qualifications about who the audience is. We've heard consumers. There are consumers. Are there partners? Are they? How should we define our audience really in our journalistic practice? Caroline.
Well, I suppose partners seems odd, but I suppose they can be. I mean, we do a lot of participatory journalism, which what that means is we ask our audiences to get involved in our journalism. So to tell us what they know that kind of it can inform and enrich what we do. And we have a particular issue in the UK, which you might have heard of, called Brexit, which has certainly polarized kind of our readers and beyond our readers hugely, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have voted for Brexit. But I think what was interesting to me was that we weren't reaching people, which that I've talked about before, which is, so we had, in the UK, there was a city called Stoke, which became, slightly lazily by journalists, if I'm honest, kind of the Brexit capital of Britain. This was why people voted Brexit. Of course, we've all learned since that that is not correct. There's no one reason why people voted for Brexit. But what we did, I've got a colleague, John Domikos, who wanted to go to Stoke and let Stoke tell us what that city was about, rather than us dictating as journalists and saying and going in there for a couple of days and reporting on it. So what we do is we do these call-outs and ask people to tell us what the issues are, who we should speak to. And we had like hundreds of responses, and John went there so many times and created an 8-part series. And I kind of think that's the sort of thing we should be doing to kind of break down these barriers between them, the readers, and us.
We weren't going on the field enough. Is that what it means?
I think there's a traditional way of going in the field, and I think everyone's kind of probably more aware now that helicoptering in is not what you do. You have to listen. I mean, Gavin mentioned this earlier. Listening is everything. And I think, as kind of resources kind of diminished for a lot of news organizations, it's more difficult to have bureaus everywhere, to be everywhere. So I think, therefore, the kind of our readers and actually, as I say, beyond readers to people, that we need to try and get them involved in our journalism far more. But the other thing I'll say really quickly is what concerns me is the demise of local media in Britain. I think that when people saw their local journalists hold local power to account, they understood what journalism meant. And sometimes the issues we report nationally don't resonate with them, which I think is an issue.
Gavin, just go on that matter about the field reaching out. How do you do it right? I'm asking the question to you because BBC seems so huge, so massive, and the audience is so big, and it's local and it's international. How do you reach out with all? How do you do it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This thing about sort of just shut up and listen is really, really critical. But even then, the danger is we listen more than we were, and then we tell their story, rather than let them tell the story, listen to them, and then give them the platform. And I think what we've tried to do more and more with initiatives like This is Bradford, This is Middlesbrough, is go there, let them say what the stories are that they want to tell, give them the means to tell them. We still have editorial control. It's not just handing over the airwaves. But in truth, actually, we also do hand over the airwaves. We have Brexit takeover day where audiences come in and determine what they want to cover and want us to cover. So a lot of it, it's also going back to the helicoptering in. There is a real danger of man, invariably, gets on train in London, goes to Stoke, gets off train, listens, gets back on train, comes back to London, does report. That isn't journalism particularly. It's terribly old-fashioned. But it's just as bad to go to Stoke, to listen, let them tell their story, and then not do Stoke for another 2 years. So it's got to be a continuous rolling programme. And having the local networks is incredibly invaluable, it's true. But we've got to make sure that's fully joined up so that the stories they're hearing go the whole way up and get played back to not just Stoke, but to Peterborough and to Ipswich and everywhere else across the UK.
But of course, when you listen more to the audience, you hear sometimes things you don't want to hear. And there's a lot of hate speech going on the social media or even on the news when you ask people. Petra, how do you select, should I use the word? I don't know. How do you deal with hate speech, really? Because when you listen to your audience, you have to agree to listen to everything, don't you? How do you do with that?
I think I have to tell something about the Standard. The Standard is, as I said, a quality paper in Austria. We are a small country, so we are quite a small paper. We have around 600,000 readers, which is quite much for a quality paper in Austria, but it's not so much. But we are a really big player with our online forum. We have many posters and a very vivid online forum. So what we found out over the years is that it's very important to do a kind of continuous moderating of the forum. If you have hate speech on the forum, then you have to go into it. We have 16 people working on this forum and communicating every day.
There's no censorship.
There is censorship. It's a strong word, but
we have automatic, artificial intelligence.
We are never closing the forum. We never do this, but we have it's a kind of a software. It's called the Forumat. We have keywords. When those keywords are used, and the Forumat goes on, and we're just looking into it and saying. And then a person sitting at their Standard is writing down. You don't have to use these words, or we will kill your post. So this is what we are doing. But they are also engaging actively. If they feel that there is a threat of hate speech on a certain issue, then we are going into it. Or our colleagues are calling us as journalists and saying, well, there is a point in this on this issue. Concerning right-wing party or something like that, and people are really using strong words, also on you journalists. Do you have 5 minutes to go into the forum and to discuss with the users? We do that quite often, and it changes a lot. Yes, it makes a difference if you communicate with them and you say, hey, I'm a human being, what are you telling me? I mean, I wrote a commentary and you do not threaten me. Yeah? And then they apologize and so on. That's what we very often find out. I mean, it's all a matter of time and a matter of resources. That's it.
Well, that's one issue we'll have to go back to.
It's quite expensive.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. But just going back to the quality of the conversation, Susanne, what are your recipes of success for a good conversation with the audience?
Well, shall I comment just on the hate speech quickly?
Yes, of course.
I do believe, and that is really something that matters to me a lot. We just have to know that our children grow up with social media. That's the space where they build opinions. So I do believe that it's the duty of every journalist to be there, to be present with good comments, with good content, with a level of discussion that is worthy also
Positive.
for social media. So I think fighting hate speech is something, but doing something against it, you know, with an active part is something else. And I do think that we all have to improve on that. Well, personally, sometimes I am affected too, of course. Political journalism is no comfort zone at all. I don't handle it the same way all the time. I remember covering the elections in Russia, and I knew what was going on social media. And then I just protected myself and didn't look at it. But usually I fight for a good tone of voice, and I know it's important that we do that. And maybe that is the difference. You can have official accounts, you know, from media outlets that can be curated and moderated. But of course, there's hashtags. There is also people being with their face on social media, and there it becomes a little bit more complicated. So to come back to your question, what I found is very important for a good conversation with the audience is to become accessible. And I think that was one of the big mistakes that we made in the past. It is a very simple equation. We want people to trust us, but you don't normally trust a foreigner. So we need to invest that they know us better. And we can't just do this with good content, with good stories. We have to explain why we did that story. We have to go on a very transparent level. I do believe that transparency is the new logic of media. People want to know why we didn't cover something. They need to know how difficult was it to do the filming in North Korea. They need to understand what's going on in our minds. They need to understand our decision-making process. And I do believe that we have to invest in that a lot more to have a good conversation with the audience.
Thank you. Gavin, transparency, does it mean there's something like the need to educate, understand what I mean? It's not in a pejorative way, but our audience, we need to say again how we work, what our methods. Is there a call for that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sort of showing our working. I completely agree with what you're saying. I think there is, when we had the Brexit takeover day and audiences came into the BBC, they were fiercely pro-Brexit or fiercely pro-Remain, and therefore saw us as biased from different perspectives because we weren't endorsing that view or overtly endorsing that view. And when they came in, by the end of the day, all of them were really surprised. The fact that, God, you guys really think about it. You really work out what you're doing and you really try and take both sides into sort of account. And you think, yeah, of course we do. Isn't that patently obvious? And of course, no, it isn't. Why would it be if they've not seen us explain our editorial processes? And a lot of our most popular journalists now, and actually beyond journalism, are the people who are discovering with the audience as they're going through the story. So whether it's someone like Stacey Dooley going to Ireland, talking to nationalists, talking to unionists, it's trying to understand their perspective, and you can see her trying to understand it, so the audience is with her, learning at the same time. There is a danger that we can be terribly slick and polished, and as a result look slightly distant and stand off. And we've done the same with audiences. When we speak to audiences, it's always been about, come into our studio, which is scary in itself. Here are loads of cameras. That's increasingly scary. Rather than doing what we're doing now, which is, we'll meet you in your house. We'll go to the Pizza Hut and meet you there and open up about what do you want from us, rather than this, as you say, very top-down and very controlled environment that we're comfortable with, but they're patently not, because we haven't explained what we do.
Regarding the relationship with our audience, the next step is how do we work with our audience? How do we get, not only listen to their stories and do something about it, but participatory journalism. Caroline, you say that that's what you basically do. What does it mean exactly when the audience become a real partner in our work?
I mean, one example, I suppose, was... for The Guardian anyway, was Windrush. I mean, because it was a story by, a scandal that was uncovered by my colleague, Amelia Gentleman. And as she was uncovering that story, and the Windrush story, I don't know if you're aware, is about a generation of people who came from the Caribbean to the UK to work in the 50s and 60s and were suddenly finding themselves deported from the UK, couldn't get back in. All sorts of issues were happening because of hostile environment policies by our Home Office in the UK. And Amelia was uncovering this and finding, you know, more and more people were coming forward. In the end, we had hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people who'd been affected by hostile environment policies. And because of what they told us, we were able to extend our journalism beyond Windrush to all the different ways that people were affected. So I think that's a really, really, really clear way where people can help us understand. But you know, that is part of it. But just to go back to the point about people here talking about transparency, I think that is the most important thing that we can do. And I completely agree with Petra that most important thing, I think, for our journalists at The Guardian is to get below the line, is to take challenges on from our readers and respond to them so they understand what we do. So it's all about participatory journalism on the one hand, but listening and responding to genuine challenge, not abuse. I don't think we'll stand any abuse of our writers or journalists on The Guardian, but to understand those sort of robust challenges and respond.
Petra, how do we measure the success of all this? You know, gave the example of connecting all the time, responding, engaging the conversation, try to make it a good conversation. How do we measure the success of it all? Is it making us better journalists?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I think that the standard audience is quite satisfied with us because our facts, our figures are going up. We gain more and more readers and so on, online and print, which is very exceptional. Also print, but it's not what I want to talk about. I think. I can give you a practical example. What made us better is we always thought that our readers, they are very well educated and they want to have this serious big analysis, much text and tiny photos and so on. And we found out we have a new editor-in-chief, and he started something which was called Dinner with the Editors. So we made it all over Austria. They had dinner. Some of them they could sign in, and some of them had dinner with 2 or 3 of journalists from the Standard. And we were talking, and what we were finding out was. Well, they also want to have small pieces. They want to have repeated explanation of very complicated issues, because many of our journalists think, okay, I explained it once and now everyone has to know. No one knows. So you have to repeat yourself, even if it's boring to you as a journalist, but well, live with that. And we are now thinking about it, and we changed our reporting very much. We do smaller things. We have a WhatsApp group with 130 of our readers, and they are always giving us response for our weekend edition, for example. And so we see what do they like, what don't they like. And I think this is a very good checkup for us. Yeah.
Yeah, we always get that in the newsroom.
Yeah.
Oh no, we did that last week. We get
yeah.
We've all gone through.
I cannot repeat myself every time. Oh yes, you have to.
But you gave all these examples, listening and changing your practices because of the remarks of the audience. Is there a risk, Gavin, that we give in too much into the audience's desires, and at the end of the day we're doing all these stories that are connected to their personal interests, and you know, explaining the commercial war between the United States and China is not as important anymore, because you know, if you ask the audience, probably they'll say no, that I'm not interested in that story. So how do you compose with the desire of the audience and, well, our editorial values and mission?
I love the idea there's a risk that we give the audience what they want, that somehow is like, that would be an appalling outcome if they actually were happy with what we gave them. The point about it is it's not that the audience doesn't want to hear about Yemen, or doesn't want to know about international trade, or doesn't want to know about conflict in Africa, or wherever it might be. It's how do we tell that story that makes them think, this is really engaging, I care about this. What we don't do enough, it's not just not showing our working, we're not overt enough sometimes, is really tell me why I should care about this story. Don't just do the whole kind of, no, it's a really important story, as if that's enough, it's really important, you should understand it. It's incredibly patronising. We had a thing, when I used to be on one of the radio programmes in Britain, we had this sort of mythical figure called Nora, who was in the garden, and it was always about, would the husband call in Nora from the garden because, oh, look, Nora, come in, they've got the deputy foreign minister from Iran on the radio. No, she wouldn't come in. It's got to be a test of what is going to make her come in to listen to what we're putting out. And unless it's engaging and really overtly something they should and will care about, then we're not doing good enough journalism. So it should be a test for us. But this idea that, oh, all they'll want is their local shopping centre, it's incredibly patronising, and it's just not true, above all.
Well, it is true, though, that we're more turned towards local stories than we used to. I'm talking from a national broadcast perspective. We've been measuring the localizations of our story, and we do much more in Switzerland. Probably it's not the case, but you were talking about here's Bradford, here's Leeds.
More locals.
More local stories in our national news.
We do the more local stories. Yeah, but it's because they're resonant. They're not unique to Stoke or Bradford or Middlesbrough. It's because by going deeper and hearing the stories here, they are absolutely relevant to stories across the UK. But by going in deep, you actually hear those stories rather than floating high. We're very comfortable doing interviews with cabinet ministers, world leaders, heads of unions. Those are things that feel terribly above the fray, rather than, and again, we ended up going into the zone of, we'll get a case study, which again is a horrible phrase of like, yeah, we need someone who's self-harmed. There you go, great, on you get, there's a clip, thanks very much, we've done a real person. Have the person who has got the experience of it at the heart of the discussion you're doing and be the story, rather than a token tick in a box.
Susanne, Wille, do you experiment the same thing in your newsroom, realizing that we have to explain better our stories, improve the quality of our journalism to reach our audiences?
Absolutely. Interestingly, personally, I started on social media posting videos, me talking to a reporter, him or her explaining the stories, the background, explaining how a news show and program is put together. And then I realized, because the response was really good and people said, we appreciate that we get a behind the scenes impression of what you're doing, that I started, not everywhere, but where it's possible, to also put this layer into the broadcast program, explaining more often than before what you said, why we're showing this piece today. Just one example, maybe in the earlier days we would have covered the elections in the Republic of Congo, just telling them what's going on. Today, I would make a connection to the audience, telling them why this matters to them, just looking at their iPhone, having some material from Congo where lots of majority of the population doesn't participate in the revenues from these mines. So you find a connection. But what I'm saying is it's very difficult to find time in the daily grind to make thinking work, to think things through, and also to at the transparent level. So I am hoping that also the processes will change a little bit, that take these things into account. It needs time, and we have to put that time.
Do you feel there's some resistance in your newsrooms from journalists saying, I'd like to be continuing explaining my area of subject. I'm specialised on this. I don't want to be engaging all the time and listening to the audience. Do one of you have that kind of situation in your newsrooms? Caroline?
There was, and I think, to be fair to our journalists, they probably had a point. I mean, to be honest, 2 years ago when I got this job of community editor, what's happened at the same time is that my former colleague Becky Gardner also did a report called The Web We Want, which was looking at our comment sections below the line, and they were not pretty. So I coincided thinking, oh great, so we're just about to publicise how bad it is and I've taken over a job, great. But she was right to do it. It was right to be transparent about it. I realise now. She was right to be transparent about it. But, it really was, we weren't managing our own comment sections, I feel, and they are much more managed now. So I can't blame any journalist for not wanting to go to the below the line or on social media or anywhere else and get attacked. Why should they? But what they are doing, we've managed them much more now, and they're really good places of discussion. So a lot of our journalists are going below the line. A lot of them are responding. Polly Toynbee, Aditya Chakrabarti, a lot of people on really complex, difficult issues. So I think actually we're starting to do really well on that.
Petra, do you agree? Do you see that in your newsroom?
Yes, I fully agree. But of course, in our news conferences, we always have the same people sitting around, and it's the people from the departments, like the politics department and so on. And if
well, now we have a serious government crisis in Austria, and our department leader of the politics department, he doesn't have any time nor space to reflect how could we go deeper, how could we do something, the other story or something. So it's important for us to change the layout for our conferences so that younger people come in from other departments, that they are happy to be part of our morning conference, because they would give us new aspects of where we should look at. If there is somebody from the lifestyle session and he says, well, you just look at the politics. They all like this young chancellor because he's very good in his fashion. So maybe it's something. I'm not talking about
the political editor must have loved that.
The political editor wouldn't see that, because of course. But it's a kind of an aspect we should in a very inequality paper way we should deal with. So. It's just a silly example, but
no. But that means there's a debate as well in the news conference about how do we deal with our audience.
Yeah.
Have you got some experience on that side?
I think you've got to be sympathetic to it. But a lot of people came into radio to be radio experts. They're not experts at social media, and we can't just simply demand they become one. Of course, we've got to all engage, but we can all do that in different ways. And I can see the head of editorial policy here from the BBC in the audience. I think. Like me, I think there's times when we'd be delighted if people just got off social media and didn't feel the need to tweet every opinion they have in order to reach the audience. They're just opining, and opining is not useful journalism. And I think that we've got to be careful that we're not so quick and immediate to get every new nuanced line out immediately to be first. Yeah. That is being first the key thing, or is increasing understanding the actual key element? And if you're just micro all the time, that is not necessarily serving the audience. Yes, you're reaching them. Yes, you're engaging them at one level. But are you helping them really get the full picture? Possibly not on some occasions. And I think it's right also that we're having a bit of a pulling back from every program must have a social media account. Every outlet needs to be engaging. Actually, do they? Can't some just be a radio program? And if they've got great radio content, somebody who is expert in that area can put that out to a wider audience. But not every single individual. There's sort of horses for courses.
Susan?
And yet I totally agree, but I think we shouldn't reduce it to the social media aspect. So there's two things what I always notice when listening to media people, including myself, by the way, saying this on a very self-critical level. We often say, how can we reach our audience? How do we engage with our audience? But we rarely ask, why should they engage with us? What is their particular pain point? So we don't have this direction of thinking within ourselves. And what's happening when you go out and speak with the public, so that's what we did in Switzerland on a very, very high level all the time, every week. So suddenly you hear that people say, we love what you're doing. We love that you ask critical questions. We think it's important that you inform us, but we sometimes feel so depressed after watching your news show. And that made us think, that's something that I heard so often. And how do we react to this? So there is a need within people's life that we help them find solutions to problems. And I'm not saying that solution-based journalism or constructive journalism is, the overall remedy to this. But as a consequence of this, we, for example, introduced a weekly program within the established news program, speaking about constructive journalism, presenting solutions, not to be confused with good news. We have a very critical approach to these solutions, and we get many reactions from the audience telling us that is good. So the journalists who engage with the audience via this program with constructive journalism, they find that quite rewarding. They find that quite good. So that is one point. And the other one is we are trying now also with Swiss television to increase the community in the analog world. Maybe that is more simple in a smaller country, but that we invite the audience and we don't talk about media issues, but we want to provide live journalism, that we want to have, a Brexit discussion, an election, US election discussion. So we're planning this, we will start in fall. And that was a reaction to an overall impression that, social media is important, but there's the need within the audience to meet us, to talk about journalism with us.
We shouldn't forget as well that our audience is also us. We keep talking about us, the media, and them, the audience. And I think that what we found at the BBC is if we're going to reach out to younger audiences, how about listening to our younger members of staff? So under 30s panels. If we're trying to reach out to more diverse audiences, how about having a lot better makeup of BAME staff and listen and include them and be directed by them? There's always this thing about how do we reach out? How do we reach out? Lots of white blokes in a room. How do we reach out to young people and BAME staff? I know. Maybe we should change the makeup of this building for starters. So that's what we're working towards.
Okay, so we won't be able, we couldn't decently continue to debate about our audiences without asking our audience today, what do they think about what's being said here. We don't have a lot of time, as you know, but probably a few questions or remarks you would like to throw in the debate. Yes, so I don't know how technically it works. So
Hi.
Start with you. Hi.
Hi, my name is Blanca Tapia. I work for the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. My question is actually about this last point that was brought up on constructive journalism, or in the States it's called more solutions journalism, and you pointed out it's not about happy ending stories. But my question is that the entire debate is about fighting for attention, for the audience attention. So it's about what do you give to me so that I spend my time reading to or watching what you produce. And I was wondering if we could turn that to the point that when I watch television, and as you said, I feel depressed, why do I want to keep feeling depressed? I switch off, or I go to news which confirm my bias, confirm the ideas I already have. So I was wondering, from the point of view of constructive journalism, you have started with something. I know in the BBC they have this new program which is called Crossing Divides, which is also on that line. I was wondering, for the printed media, what can you do in this regard? Can you propose ideas in your reporting that show how other countries are doing it? I'm saying it from my EU point of view. I work on producing information. I try to provide good examples of countries where, for example, they are successfully fighting racism and xenophobia. This is never taken by the media. It seems they just want the bad story. How can we change this around? Thank you.
So from the print, let's just ask the Guardian or the Standard, Petra or Caroline.
We have our own. We have our own. Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, the print media, we did now twice we did something. It was like talking about divide. It was called Austria Speaks, and the other thing was Europe Speaks. So we brought together people living nearby but having totally different opinions. It was something that we started, and it was a huge success, because I think in Austria 10,000 people took part in this event, and this is how we can, and they just met on a certain day and they debated political things, climate change, you name it, everything. And we were listening to them, not everyone, of course, but selected pairings. And it was quite interesting, and how we could, I mean, it makes a difference in an analog way if you look someone in the eye and tell him you're totally wrong. You will say it in a different way than posting it in an online forum. And this is the way we can kind of develop our discussion level. And I think this could be we take part in constructive journalism when we do things like that. Another example from my field of working is that we found out in our online forum that young women were talking a lot about the problems with menstruation, for example. So we did something very revolutionary. We made an article series on menstruation problems of women, because it's a taboo. They don't talk about it. Still, I mean, we are writing 2019 now, but it's still a taboo. And young journalists from the Standard, they were writing articles and having discussions with our audience and so on. And it was a big laugh among the media branch, but it was a huge success among our readers. So that's what we taught.
Caroline, do you want to add something?
Just quickly, we had a project called The Upside, which was a constructive journalism project, and it was for that reason. But actually, I think it's something that everyone is beginning probably to understand in newsrooms, because, I mean, if you think about environment reporting right now is rightly apocalyptic. You know, this is important. But of course, if it is absolutely apocalyptic, everybody's going to turn off and not do anything. So I think there is a real sense that you have to also include successes to make sure that people actually can understand and comprehend the kind of difficulties that we're all facing. It just makes it more palatable in a way, and I don't mean that in a kind of in an easy, simplistic way, but I think you do need to have that kind of, it is journalism. As you say, it's not just good news at the end of something, which I think news programs used to do a long time ago, but it is part of it.
It is funny how we're so wary of it's not good news.
Yeah.
It's not good news journalism, don't worry. As if that's...
Well, no,
why is that so bad? It's got such a bad name that anything positive is PR. We don't want to do PR. If we have a league table, we'll go to the bottom, which is the worst. That's the story. Who's failing the most? I do think we need to subvert what journalism is, what we interpret journalism to be. It's not always about doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And if the audience is saying to us they're sick of being depressed, in political coverage, our audience is very clear. They're sick of it being pale, male and stale. They're sick of it being aggressive. So what do? We carry on being aggressive because that's what political journalism is. It's like, why don't we listen to what they're actually telling us and try and revamp what we do and actually give audiences, going back to your point, yes, give audiences what they want. It doesn't mean we're any less robust. It doesn't mean we're not holding to account. Of course we are. But for a positive purpose, not to undermine and skewer and make someone look stupid.
I think it's kind of that "and finally" kind of thing that everyone is wary of, and it is as Gavin, you know, it is journalism.
But it is a real debate, though, because in the newsroom, I've experienced some really thorough debate about some journalists saying it is not my job to tell everybody, oh, the trains arrived on time. That's what always happens. I'm not there to deliver good news. I'm there to explain the world, and
all the trains arrive on time. That's
what
the
they
story.
do in Switzerland.
So it's worth.
It's a huge story in London.
But
let me tell you, it's something that
going
really
back to the mission of journalism.
Yes.
Constructivism, is it part of our mission? Just a
because
final word
why
before we take
is it
another
that we
question?
have this debate anyway? Because it's in our very DNA. This is why we have become journalists, to be critical, and we are very good at
Our identity,
pieces and stories where you have a pro and con, and you show both sides. Well, it's not really in our DNA to think in solutions, and this is why it is so hard. And I would not tie solution-based journalism or constructive journalism to environmental, societal, equality issues. It's a mind, it's a way of thinking, exactly. So, for example, we started doing that special feature within the program once a week. That was just, somehow an idea to get people trained with it, that we do this actually, that we have some pressure, but we started doing this also in the program. Just, you can apply this way in every subject. For example, if you've got some political issue going on, you can still do a very critical piece, pro and con, but then on a second level, you start to cover solutions, possible solutions that are already there, and you question them. And that is really something that sounds so easy, but executing it is really hard.
We've time for another question. I think, yes? Do you have?
Hi, Maria Ressa from Rappler in the Philippines. I'm curious if you are dealing with the fact that in our case, journalists are actively under attack in the United States, in Southeast Asia. How do you handle that? Because not only is your credibility we've heard this from the Dawn, right? Also, and India. Not only is credibility under attack, facts are under attack. The audience doesn't know whom to believe. How do you handle that? Is
That's
it
the question of going back to trust, really. Well, probably. Petra, would you like to answer? Because I'm thinking of the news in your country. You've been under some attack, really, as a media in Austria, their standard.
Yeah, well, the former government that broke up 2 weeks ago, they had something they called message control, and that's why we were so critical, because message control meant that they are controlling every message, and they didn't give us, or that they didn't like to give thorough information to critical media outlets. So they really tried to control everything. We didn't get information that we should get because we don't have information transparency law in Austria. We should have, but and they promised it, but they didn't do it. And then they tried. They did a draft law. It was called de-anonymization draft law, which meant that we should give the names of our online forum users, which was against all laws, and we fought that, of course. Well, the law didn't come. We will see if it will come in the next legislation period.
How do you deal with it regarding your audience?
Well, we explained to them. We said, and because we told them that it would be a threat for them, because there is, there is an expression. It's a freedom of expression. It's the law in Austria, and well, it is threatened if you cannot say what you want. Because just look to Germany. They have a law where they say, okay, you just give the name if something happens, if there is if there is a judicial case, but not if anyone says, well, I think that someone said strong words on me in the internet forum. And the law in Austria would have been that we should give the names of our users, and we wouldn't do that. And we explained to our audience, yes, and I think they understood.
Thank you. I think we have time for the last question from you. So I think you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Amin Husseinov. I'm from Azerbaijan. My question is regarding the fake audience, because in countries like mine, we don't have real free media, and all public broadcasting, state broadcasting, and private traditional teleradio broadcasting under control of the government. And it's no way for communicate with the audience. But only one platform like YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram still is independent platform. Government tried to target it, outspoken bloggers, but still this environment is free. But now we have a huge problem when we publish our materials. We have thousands comments under each our publications, and 95% of these public comments, it's attacking from troll armies. And my question is regarding these issues, because same issues they have independent media in Russia, and now we saw in US elections and in Brexit, in Netherlands, in other states, for Russian even using his troll factories to change opinions via these comments for local audience in US, in Europe. Do you have any recommendations for authoritarian states like mine? How independent media, free and small stakeholders should fight with these issues? And how in democratic states, big medias like yours able to make some kind of recommendation, serious effectively tools, don't give possibilities for third states to change democracy and change your values in your own countries. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a big question. The first part I got about, it's going back to moderation, of course, of all the hate speech, and I think we've partly answered that. regarding the second part, is there a form of responsibility from the European or democratic countries? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, do you have practical tools to prevent this?
To
Because
prevent
we're
it,
talking
practical
about too
tools.
much.
Well,
but still-
other than engage in the conversation, Susanne?
Well, just I spoke to an IT specialist the other day, and she said with these trolls, we have the problem that they become more intelligent every month. For example, they have learned to stop and wait before they comment on something, so they're not detected.
They're not always real people.
Yes,
There's some.
I mean the
you mean the
artificial-
artificial
yes, sorry.
messages.
I mean these are often also artificial programs, and they become more intelligent. So I think we have to rely also on data and IT specialists
technical
also
tools.
helping us to get better tools to detect it. But I think it's a huge problem. I think Maria also yesterday pointed it out that we can't only solve with journalism and journalists, which doesn't mean that we're off the hook.
Unfortunately, we have no time to open all the technical aspect of artificial intelligence, but it is a main theme, of course, nowadays. Thank you ever so much, Caroline Bannock, Petra Stuiber, Gavin Allen, and Susanne Wille for this discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, as we all did here, and have a good day. Thank you.